Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2. Hope you all had a good evening last night and are suitably refreshed. Now, it's my great honour to be able to welcome Ros, not just as the Director of the Hospice of St Francis, Berkhamsted, but now also as the National Director for Hospice Care, who's going to be talking to us, and her title, very typically, Ros, is From Cups of Tea to Complexity. And we suspect there's not going to be time for questions at the end of this session because we've got workshops going straight in. But Ros is around, and you all know who Ros is, and you'll be able to collar her with any questions you do have afterwards. So without further ado, Ros, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I do get the sense that I'm preaching to the converted, but actually sometimes that's a good thing. Although I have to say the hospice movement, if indeed we are still a movement, and we were challenged by Barbara Monroe many times to say, are we a movement or a monument? Question. We do talk a lot to ourselves, and I hope that following Helen Bevan yesterday and some of the thoughts I'm going to share with you, that we start to talk more openly, transparently, and assertively and confidently with others. So, I like this slide, which is the new branding of Hospice UK. It shows a nurse sitting on a bed, it shows flowers, it shows a patient who is dressed, and what else does it show? It shows 2 pillows, which are rare in hospital. And I'll talk later on a bit about regulation and rules, but sometimes we do need to look at what is sensible and compassionate and stand up for what we know patients need and require for a safe journey. A favourite quote of mine, I think the NHS, and I'm sure there are many people working in hospitals here, I feel the NHS lost its way when we were disallowed from bringing flowers into the ward. Wards are now quite bleak places. I don't think, for those of you who are evidence-based, that there was very much evidence to base that decision on. So I did write a brief blog for eHospice a few weeks ago called From Cups of Tea to Complexity to really reflect on the changing nature of the patients that we were seeing in my own hospice, where I've worked for about 18 years. 18 years ago, we looked after lots of patients who were dying normally and predictably. And things have changed. A few weeks ago, we were referred a young woman who was dying of liver failure following a long history of anorexia nervosa. She had a child who was being fostered. She had a brother who had a heroin addiction problem. She was homeless. And that really did test, and I'm sure many of you have got many similar stories, that level of complexity made us feel as though we were the last resort. She wasn't actually dying. The hospice was referred this young woman because nobody else knew what to do or how to support her. And I think that level of complexity, I'm sure, is familiar to everybody here, all of the clinical leaders, and it's that which we need to know. When do we intervene? When do we facilitate? When do we lead? And I think that differentiation of intervention, facilitation, education, and leadership is where we all have to think, what we all have to think about strategically. I'm not going to talk particularly about complexity, but if you're very interested in the science of complexity, then do come to one of the workshops just before lunch. I think David's going to introduce some of the theories of complexity, but we also very much welcome some visitors from Montreal who are going to talk about care in other settings. So, as part of my article, I was also very interested in what it is about what we do that we can inject back into mainstream care, because surely that is our mission. And I came across one line that Cicely Saunders wrote in 1981, I think. My pen's going to drop off. It's from a book called Hospice, The Living Idea. We moved out of the NHS so that attitudes and knowledge could come back in. Now, surely that is our challenge, and how are we going to do that? I think we've started, but the pace is too slow for me, and I hope that before I retire, we see much more of what we have learnt in hospice care injected back. But we can't inject back full multidisciplinary teams. We need to find out what is essential to our care that can be delivered in other settings. So I'm going to move on quite quickly. I've got lots of pictures, and I hope that what I'm going to do is stimulate you to think about some of the things that we all need to think about. Now, one of my favourite quotes from The Little Prince, "It's only with the heart that one can see clearly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Now, I've never challenged The Little Prince before, but I think we do. We can see things with our eye, and we have to get more clear and more clarity about what we're actually doing and get rid of complacency in the sector. And I think then it will become clearer about what we can inject elsewhere. Now, this is my picture of the last resort, because of course there is a pun there, because we do have deck chairs and lovely gardens and lovely buildings, and it does feel a bit like a resort sometimes in the summer when you're sitting outside on a hospice patio. But that last resort, if we are indeed the last resort, not just for those people at the end of life, but for people with very complex stories, we need to think how we're going to respond. We heard from Helen yesterday about change, and she gave us many tips about rebels and troublemakers and edges and networks and abandoning hierarchies. And the most dangerous phrase is, "We've always done it like this." And I have heard that many times, not only in my own hospice, but in many others. But we have changed. This is an advert. It's hard to believe. More doctors smoke Camel cigarettes than any other cigarette. Now, I used to smoke Camel cigarettes, and at the end of a ward round at Westminster Hospital when I was a medical student, we all used to go into Sister's office and light up. Now, and that was with the Queen's physician too. So, we can change. Cultures can change. And actually, it is extraordinary how England has adapted to a less smoking culture. What can we learn from other public health movements? This was a great cough syrup that actually is before my time. It contains alcohol, cannabis, chloroform, and morphine. Now, I am absolutely sure that my father, who smoked till 92, bought loads of bottles of this. I don't know who's done the research to find out why we've abandoned it, because I don't know any other cough medicine that works. Does anybody here? So, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, we do not want to get rid of things that work. When I qualified, we were using the Brompton cocktail as our main form of pain relief at Westminster Hospital. We then moved on to oral morphine. I still sometimes long for, not personally, the Brompton cocktail. But more seriously, the work of change began with this pivotal report that I urge you all to read again. It's a small yellow book that you can download from the Demos website. It was a think tank, independent from what was Help the Hospices. To allow people the deaths they want, end-of-life care has to be radically transformed. And Charles Leadbeater led this work, and there are some really important ideas that are not going to go away about community capacity, mainly. And that led on to the work of the Commission, and there are some extraordinary ideas and pointers to help us in our way forward. There are many Commission documents, but the one that really captured what we all need to think about for the future, and many hospices have used this as the agenda for their board away days, was the final report of the Commission, which I commend to you. Just going to keep an eye on time. Okay. Why do we need to change? We all know. there are lots of people. We're all living longer. This is a very powerful slide from the King's Fund, which really sent that idea home to me, that there are going to be lots of families with great-great-grandparents and really nobody fit enough to care for them. So is the whole idea of dying at home surrounded by your family, is that sustainable without looking at different models of care? I don't know if anybody here has ever read Susan Sontag. She wrote an amazing book called Illness as Metaphor, where she talked about the kingdom of the sick and the kingdom of the well. And this has recently been commented on by Dr. Iona Heath, who is one of my gurus. She's a GP, now retired. She was president of the Royal College of General Practitioners. She's extended this metaphor and said, yes, we are moving too many people from the kingdom of the well into the kingdom of the sick. We are over-treating people, we're over-diagnosing people. Symptoms become illnesses. We're diagnosing dementia too early. I mean, what is the point of knowing? Every time I forget a word, I think I'm getting dementia. Does that sound familiar? Yep, okay. So we're moving too many people from the kingdom of the well into the kingdom of the sick, and I'd like to take that metaphor a bit further and talk about the kingdom of the living and the kingdom of the dying. Living in the kingdom of the living is difficult because we all know that we're going to die, but we have various strategies to repress that idea. The concept of death anxiety is the idea that actually it's really makes us anxious to think about dying, therefore we come up with all sorts of strategies to avoid it. And if you want to read about a very popular psychology book, Irvin Yalom from the States is a psychotherapist who's written an amazingly easy-to-follow book about the concept of death anxiety, how we can't really think about it. It's why the conversations that we keep being encouraged to have about where people want to die, why they are so difficult. But I hope by the end of this lecture you'll feel more confident, and I'm sure most of you are. How we approach death anxiety has been developed by the theory of terror management, and anxiety management has been developed by some amazing American social psychologists, Sheldon Solomon in particular. Watch him on YouTube, he is hilarious, and I hope one day we'll see him at a conference in the UK. And this is my model. What he says is that when we're faced with severe anxiety about our mortality, he has studied the American population after 9/11 and developed this theory of terror management. After 9/11, people became more connected with each other. They sought out people like themselves, and they also did things that raised their self-esteem. So there was more giving to charity, more volunteering, and more connection socially. And I think that's possibly how hospices work. I've shared this idea before, that we do raise self-esteem by giving people meaning back to their lives, even when time is really short, and we promote connection. So hospices are an antidote to death anxiety, but often we're involved too late. I want to mention the word health because I think we've lost the word heal, which is in the middle of health. Healing now is the domain of crystal therapists and iridologists and all sorts of complementary practitioners or alternative practitioners even. But actually, nurses, doctors, social workers, chaplains, we are all healers, and I'd like to re-involve that word back into our vocabulary. And in fact, of course, medicine always was a dual specialty. There's Hippocrates and Aesculapius. We've always had care of the mind and the body. And this is actually a mosaic on the island of Kos, which shows the god of healing and the god of medicine, and they were absolutely of equal importance. But we have now become the servant to science, and perhaps we've lost some of the art. Another guru of mine is Professor Balfour Mount from Montreal, And he wrote very eloquently about how we can combine the science of palliative care with the art of healing. And I think that's what we do naturally without even thinking about it, but we need to be able to confidently talk about it. I haven't got time to go into the detail of every slide, but I hope that you will look at the app, and you're very welcome to download everything. So the whole concept of whole person care, I think that it's amazing that we're looking at integrated care just right at the end of life when people are disintegrating. We need to have integrated care much earlier on in people's illnesses. And we know we now have specialists of the left eyebrow and the right fourth toe on your left foot. We have become so specialized that we have lost the person in the middle of all this. And often that personhood is only regained right in the crisis towards the end of life. And my vision is that medicine does become more of a general specialty again. And how can palliative medicine help that agenda? So I'd recommend this book to you, Whole Person Care, again, from the Montreal team. There's lots of new thinking in the kingdom of the living about self-management. Now, I thought, is self-management an NHS idea that we all go off and self-manage and then we won't need any doctors or nurses? But again, my eyes were opened when I heard a physio say, do you know how many hours in the year there are? There are, well, actually, I think that's a rounded up number, 8,760. If you count up the average number of hours that we meet doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, it's probably only about 8. So for 8,750 hours, our patients and family are on their own every year. And what do we do to support those families in actually caring, practically supporting people? So we do expect families to do 24/7 care. Self-management, a buzzword, we'll think about it. So I've talked about the kingdom of the living. I'd like to take a few moments now to talk about the kingdom of the hospital. Half of complaints still in the NHS are about care of people. This was from an old National Audit Office report. Half of the complaints are about care in the final days of life. That uses up huge amounts of resources, energy, and emotion to deal with those complaints, quite apart from the families whose memories have been scarred by poor experience. What if hospitals were a safe and peaceful place to die? What can we do as a sector to support that? Now, I think this slide has been shown in several presentations. We can't all have horses at our bedside. That is not the answer to safe, compassionate care. A good idea and fantastic publicity. This was a slide given to me by a family, had come from our local hospital. Marion, on the left, in a hospital gown, with a tube, looking very ill. And 2 days later, she was in the hospice. And our only interventions, and I'm not sure this is specialist palliative care, were getting her hair done, dressing, taking the tube out and managing her symptoms in other ways. And she did die, actually, about a week later. But her personhood was restored quickly. There are many things happening to improve care in hospitals, but I think much, much more is needed. There's some amazing initiatives in Ireland, hospice-friendly hospitals. I'd urge you to look at their website where they are bringing hospice culture. They've made a huge strides. I don't think there's anybody here from Ireland, is there? But hospitals are changing in Ireland, slowly. And then there's, I think I've spelt it wrong, the KELCA programme, where hospices are partnering with local hospitals to mentor and develop action learning to support ward nurses in the chaos and complexity of busy wards. So more of that. And also, I would urge you to read David Clarke's pivotal article published earlier this year, where he did a very, very simple study. He looked at everybody who died on a certain date, and then he looked back a year to see who was in hospital a year before, and he found that 30% of the people in hospital a year before had died in the following year. Now, surely our challenge is to really identify that 30% and then involve palliative care early if it hasn't already been involved. So what if doctors and nurses started to diagnose that people were dying? I think this is really difficult. We need to have braver conversations and use that what if question. What if things don't get better? What is important to you? These are really simple questions, but because of the changing discontinuity of healthcare, both in primary care, I don't know if there are any GPs here, and certainly in hospitals, these important questions get left to the next shift, then the next day. Meanwhile, more tests are done. People start to get depressed, pressure ulcers, staying in hospital too long. I watched an animation, which I also urge you to watch, on the King's Fund website about Mrs. Andrews and her stay in hospital. I learnt that every time you move a patient from one ward to the other, you add 2 days to that hospital stay. And people become more disorientated and confused, and decisions don't transmit from one ward to another. I have to bring a few Russians in. So most of the suffering in this world comes from about leaving things unsaid, and that's so true. We really miss out asking the simplest of questions, and I know that Atul Gawande has been mentioned. One of the key messages from his thinking and his latest book is just ask what's important to people, and they will tell you. And sometimes it's not about more chemotherapy, it's about getting home to the family. I think if I'm going to finish at 10:10, I haven't got time to dwell on this slide, but it's a really important one. We often can't change reality that much, but we can manage expectation a bit better. And Kalman suggested that the gap between reality and expectation is called suffering. And we see people whose expectations are not based in reality at all. Nobody's had a conversation with them about dying, and therefore they're suffering a lot because they don't know why they're feeling so ill and so weak. And if you're thinking about Christmas presents, expectations are resentments under construction. And I think that's the same with our patients. They expect to be cured because maybe a surgeon has said, I've removed all the cancer and it won't come back. That is an expectation. That is a resentment under construction. So moving quickly on, we've talked about the kingdom of the living, the kingdom of the hospital, the kingdom of the elderly. Now, this is really important. What if palliative and elderly care worked in harmony to address the problems of comorbidity? There was another key paper, I've got all the papers here, from America. Professor Pacala said he's challenged that actually most of what we do is exactly the same as what elderly care teams do. And how closely are we working with them? 18 years ago, or 20 years ago, we didn't see people with dementia, advancing heart failure, respiratory disease, all in one patient. But now we are, and that's exactly the work of elderly care. And I think one of the key collaborations we all need to make locally is with our elderly care teams, both within the hospitals and in the community. Because what we're very good at in different specialties of medicine is fighting for what only we can do. And there are things that only palliative medicine specialist teams can do, caring for younger people, for instance. And there are things that elderly care teams are much better at. But most of our work overlaps completely, I would suggest. Both specialties work with multidisciplinary teams, they focus on what's important to people, and they try to meet people's goals. So I think these are conversations we have to have. And I'm sure in parts of the UK this is working well. In America, it's a joint specialty in many areas. Whoops, have I gone back? Okay, the kingdom of the dying, where we're all, sadly, very comfortable. Another key paper for me that we give to all of our young recruits to the hospice is Chochinov's paper on dignity and his ABCD of dignity. I urge you to read that. We know, everybody in this room, that palliative care is not just about symptoms, but symptoms are very important, and it's the easiest part of our job. Pain control, breathlessness control, control of vomiting. Nobody can actually look at the meaning of their lives if those symptoms are troubling them. But that, of course, isn't the whole story. So just to mention a patient, it's interesting which patients we remember. Toby was a young artist who was dying of a rare cancer in his mid-30s. What was the meaning of his pain? So we spent a lot of time focusing on his very difficult pain, but the meaning of his pain to him was that his cancer was getting worse and that he was going to die and leave his 2 young children, Joshua and Hope, who were then 3 and 1. He was an artist, and we managed to use art as a tool to help his suffering, and it was absolutely pivotal in the management of his pain. And when we use the word meaning, it's a funny word, giving meaning to people's lives. It's simple. It really is just helping people to focus on their memories, their achievements. We haven't all achieved great things, but we've all achieved something in our life. And people really, really value talking about their lives. I remember one nurse saying to me, but it's so intrusive asking about people's lives, but how can you look after people if you don't know who they are? This is one of Toby's pictures, which he did with a black felt pen on a piece of A4 paper while he was in the hospice for a period of pain control. And I often asked him, what did that hand represent? Some people see him as being squeezed, some people as him being held, and he said sometimes it was the hospice, his wife, children, God, morphine. It was different things depending on how he was feeling. And there was a great article, I think, in The Observer a couple of weeks ago on the value of nostalgia and how looking back in your life improves your mood. So I would urge everybody who's working with clinical teams to try and give the confidence to everybody. This is not just the work of chaplains or people specialised in life review. It's all of our work. I'm going to move on from chasing daylight. So what if we asked what matters to you? And I know this has been a strapline in the last year. What matters to you rather than what is the matter? And we get amazing answers. What matters to people is often being at home with their family. It's as simple as that. It usually isn't swimming with dolphins and climbing Kilimanjaro. And in fact, just to mention, because I haven't got a slide about him, a patient called Eamon recently was in the hospice, and he wrote an article for us called The H Word, about how terrified he had been of coming into the hospice and how comforted he'd felt after an admission. But I was talking to him about his bucket list, and actually he was more interested in telling me about his fuck it list. And on his bucket list was everything he wasn't going to do before he died. And that did include, he wasn't going to climb Kilimanjaro, but he wasn't going to do any more housework. He was going to spend time with his family. So maybe we all need one of those lists. Don't wait till you're dying. So palliative care in 5 minutes. I'm often told that our specialty is luxurious because we have the time. I often don't have the time, and as our caseloads grow, we have less and less time to really get to the heart of the matter. And it is about brave questions. What's the worst thing at the moment? You know, we're taught as doctors and nurses to ask very systematic questions, but sometimes you do have to go to what really matters. And how do you see your future? And people immediately tell you, well, I think I'm going to die before Christmas. So everybody's been agonizing outside the room about how to ask about prognosis. But people usually want to talk about this. So is it the nature of the attention that we give to people? And attention is an interesting word. In French, obviously, there's the meaning of both waiting as well as listening. So watching, waiting, and listening. And I think it is the nature of the attention that doesn't always require hours of time. It's the way you are with people. So this was a moment in our hospice that got a lot of coverage on social media. It was absolutely a moment in time. Peggy, an elderly grandmother, was dying. Her granddaughter Natasha was 21 weeks pregnant. We have an ultrasound machine, which I urge hospices to get. We don't have much kit in hospices, but this has really proved value. But anyway, we've never used it for obstetric use before. And Natasha, who was a policeman, granddaughter, she'd noticed us using this machine on her grandmother's tummy where we were looking for fluid. And she said, you know that machine? Can I show my grandmother my baby who's 21 weeks because she's not going to live to see this baby born? And it was the most amazing moment. Peggy was slightly muddled but became absolutely engaged. And for those of you who are not clinical, a 21-week fetus is actually quite big, and you can see the face, and you can see the limbs, and you can see the baby swimming around. And it was a magical moment and has created an extraordinary memory for Natasha and her future baby. So cashing in on those moments to do things a bit differently. On our ultrasound protocol, it does not include scanning visitors' tummies. So maybe we'll rewrite it. So what if our patients and public trusted us to care for them wherever they are, whether that's a care home or a hospital or indeed a hospice or at home? That's a difficult one, isn't it? Trust me, I'm a junior doctor. Would you? So in hospices, we do try and create safe and fearless places. But we need to create those safe and fearless places everywhere. The Grateful Dead. We do get themes we've analysed our thank you letters now and again, and the same themes come up. Safety, dignity, good food, welcome. Surely this is injectable into other settings. What if there was free social care in the last months of life? This is a campaign that collaboratively many of the major end-of-life organisations, Marie Curie, Sue Ryder, Hospice UK, and Macmillan, I think, are campaigning for and have been. Is this bath a health bath or a social care bath? Is this physical care or spiritual care? Indeed, is it specialist care or special care? And, you know, we have been bogged down in definitions for a long time, and we need to stop focusing too much on the language and just getting on with the work. Some of the best patient experience feedback we've had is about the bath. So the kingdom of the family, I've already mentioned some of this about the expectations of family care. What if 60% of us died at home and only 20% in hospital? At the moment, it's the other way round, shockingly. Home is where we want to be when we're well. Home is often where we think we want to be when we're ill. It's not always possible, and those demographics are going to challenge the notion of dying at home seriously. Now, what if we coached families more in that care? And by coaching, I really mean giving practical help. We see patients come home from hospital with great big plastic bags of medication, no idea what those drugs are for or how to give them, and just expect families to take on that complex task. So we make assumptions that families will care, but often When the crunch comes, when pain is bad, we don't trust them to give injections. Now, why is that? We're not a nation of wife killers or husband killers, but often we trust families to a certain level and then worry about them taking on tasks that would really make a difference. So many families are trusted to give insulin injections or blood thinning injections, but not pain relieving injections. And that's always concerned me. I've got about 5 more minutes. I'm going to rush through. Okay, kingdom of the community. That's crucial. Volunteering is absolutely at the heart of hospice care. We need to see how we can harness the capacity of the community to care for each other. There are great examples out there. Casserole Club, where you put together people who like cooking and people who are ill and not well enough to cook. Good Gym. I think we heard about Good Gym at this conference 2 years ago, where runners, who normally run nowhere, and it always seems like a waste of time to me running nowhere, they go and visit somebody at the end of their run who's living alone and seeking company. So some great ideas. And Helen Bevan urged us yesterday, I would look at the latest newsletter from her new hub, The Edge, because there is an amazing article on social action and community and references. And the Cabinet Office, the recent grant funding, looking at how we can harness social action in the community, that is our future. And we are learning from places around the world who are doing it well. We are all fragile, but actually for the cyclists in the room, and I know there are many, if you make contact with people, you're less likely to be harmed. So if you're on a busy London road and you catch the eye of the bus driver or the taxi driver, they're less likely to knock you down. And that's why we have to make eye contact with other people outside the sector. Yes, what if people didn't feel a burden? I'm going to rush on now because I think I've got just a few more slides that are really critical to my message. The kingdom of the future. Let's use technology differently to support our work and to support more care. It is the way. Twitter, Skype. I'm sure many of you are starting to use Skype to follow up patients. This was a very funny article in The Guardian which warned us that if you are using Skype to review patients, everybody looks ill on Skype. So that's the first message. And the second message is that if the doctor asks you to take off your clothes, do check that it is the doctor. And I just wanted to flag up here, and this is a personal story. I supported a person for nearly a year by text. A man of 40 dying of cancer of the esophagus, and his wife, Jo. Jo and I and Dave exchanged 497 texts over the course of a year, only 3 visits. He died peacefully at home. This was a family who really didn't want any intrusion from any healthcare professionals. He had a short visit to the hospice at the beginning of, shortly after diagnosis, and then we carried on by text. And I'm not going to read them because they're on the website, but we did lots of symptom control, lots of emotional support. I remember Jo texted me when she actually told the children that Dave was dying a few days before he actually did die. She sent me a picture of him hugging each of their 4 children. And then just in the last minutes of his life, she texted me to say that his breathing had changed, and then that text at the bottom where she said, he's gone. And I am going to write this up because actually I believe, and now Jo is an ambassador for the hospice, talking about different ways of being supported. She didn't want 1 million strangers to come into her house. She wanted a way of caring that suited her and her lifestyle. And if we are going to become person-centred, I'm sure there were a whole load of information governance issues around this, but actually they didn't matter. And one of the things that Atul Gawande says is that, I've written it down. Discipline makes daring possible. Now, we do have to become more daring, but we need that discipline to underpin it. So we do need protocols around using texts and emails. but they are safe. We email our banks and our tax returns and text people all the time. We trust this form of communication, and so do patients. So we need to get beyond some of the paranoia. So I think I am at the end. I believe our vision, the vision that we've shared in this conference and will carry on today, it is possible. We have to be experts with a light touch. We can't do it all. We have to educate much more, and we have to fearlessly partner with people we're not used to speaking to. So don't sell your soul when you're selling your service. Be confident about what your patients and families tell you. We should be more confident about that message of making a difference. So Dame Cicely's vision, the vision has to stay the same, of holistic, person-centered care, but the delivery has to change, and that's our challenge. So this is really the last 2 slides. Sorry, David, am I way over? The kingdom of rules, that is a new kingdom. Well, maybe it's just a growing kingdom. I stood here 8 years ago, the last time I was invited to do a speech at Help the Hospices conference, and I was worried about the LCP. I'm not very good at seeing the future, but on this occasion I did. And I felt that there was a risk that palliative care was going to be reduced to a tool, and indeed we've seen that play out. So I don't know if I'm making any more predictions for the next 8 years, but this is a great quote about bureaucracy from a French historian called de Tocqueville. Bureaucracy covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated rules through which the most original minds and the most energetic characters cannot penetrate. Now, I sometimes feel I am in that world now. Lots of small, complicated rules. Deprivation of liberty safeguards are challenging us all. I don't believe our patients are dying in detention or dying in custody when they're slowly dying of dementia, but these are things that we have to challenge as a sector together, and I hope that Hospice UK will support some of those challenges before we get submerged. Last plea, and I am preaching to the converted here, we shouldn't have to be funding our care through running marathons and mud events. And I think I'm going to stop there because I've said everything that I want to say. Thank you.